All right, welcome back. So before I went to get my coffee, we were talking about Plato and the world of the forms versus the physical world, and we used Clark and courage as an example. Well, now I want to introduce you to something that's more formal than Clark and courage. This is called the divided line. It's one of the ways that Plato illustrated his view of how knowledge comes about. And so the reason we're spending so much time talking about this is an essential question when developing our philosophy of knowledge, philosophy of education rather. What is knowledge? From whence does it come? How can a teacher teach? What are the capacities and limitations of a student? So this divided line is something that is aiming for the good. The good is sometimes called the one. Plato would illustrate it using the sun, that which shines light. We'll talk more about that in a second. So he had this line going straight up, and then because he wanted to drive some of us crazy, he divides the line unevenly. It's not, there's no section that is equal to another as far as how much space is given to it. But this is the divided line. Usually you'll see it done horizontally, but I think it's more helpful to think of it vertically because we are aiming up to the ideal. We're aiming up to the good. Any questions? Yes. Oh, you were just scratching your head. Okay. I need to find something to build in an opportunity for me to have my coffee because you aren't here. It's just this unblinking eye of the camera staring at me. That's what seems to be real right now. Oh, I just realized I'm not on the screen. I'm still here, but I thought it would be helpful for you to see the lines, so I'll just scoot over here instead. All right. So this first section of knowledge. He calls these shadows and images. And the way that we apprehend shadows and images, we're only grasping at imagination. And I'll elaborate on this in a second. But these things that he puts in the category of shadow and image, if we believe these things are real, we are in error. So if you look at a painting of a chair, and you believe that that painting is real, it's not, because that's not even it doesn't even represent a chair because it doesn't have that which is essential to being a chair. This is one of the reasons why Plato is not a big fan of art. He sees this representation as a diminishment of that which is true, something that is grounded in the world of the forms. Now, let's say we're not looking at a shadow or an image, something that requires imagination, but we are grasping that an animal or a plant exists. When we do that, when we have a visible object, something that's truly before us, then we have a belief or an opinion. So he would categorize this as a true belief or a right opinion. But it's not knowledge. Knowledge must be directed towards that which is universal and unchanging. So what are those things? Well, first, this is reality as we perceive it. So the closest you can come to knowledge here is true belief. But you don't have knowledge at this point. It's just something that you're grasping at. Now we move up and we have things like mathematical objects. 2. What is 2? You can only illustrate 2 for me. You know what 2 is. You fundamentally understand what 2 is. When you have 1 less than 3, or you have 2 singular objects together, you have 2. But those objects aren't the 2-ness. They're representing 2. So how do we get there? This is thought using hypothesis. You are able to come to knowledge of these concepts, and I'll elaborate on the concepts more in a moment, through posing a hypothesis, testing it, and using reason to verify it. So that's the basic level of knowledge. But true knowledge is when we get to the world of the forms. These are the transcendent truths. And the way Plato describes this, and it's in the Republic, section 511b, if you want to look it up, the mind uses a dialectic, which is a form of pure conceptual thinking that leads to the purest form of knowledge. When we do that, that's what Plato says is knowledge, because we can see the forms themselves. In that highest sphere of thought, hypotheses are not taken as assumptions that we take for granted, but the literal beginning point. Stephen Evans calls it the springboard from which reason will lead us eventually, as we pursue it, to a pure vision of the truth. Then we have actual knowledge. So what we sense, that's just perceived reality. But the true world, the world of the forms, this intelligible world, is where we arrive at our conclusions through reason. So another way to illustrate this, and this is the most famous of the illustrations, this is Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So this grounds us into Plato's metaphysic, but you'll see that his metaphysic is grounded in the quest for knowledge. So as you look at this picture, and if you Google Plato's Cave, you'll see all sorts of artistic representatives of what it is he's describing in the Republic. But here are the different facets. You have these people who are in chains with their back to a wall, and they're looking at a wall that's functioning as a screen. So there's this wall here that's functioning as a screen, and then there's this half wall here. And the individuals are lined up, sitting down in chains with their backs to that half wall, looking at this wall. Now, behind this half wall are a bunch of people walking by holding puppets of rabbits and trees and houses and other things. And in front of them is a fire. So here is a light source, the puppeteers, and the wall. The light hits the puppets. That reflects on the screen-like wall. I just realized. Oh, I am. Okay. I thought that I wasn't on the screen. So it hits the screen-like wall, and these people who are sitting here with their backs to the wall, this is the only reality they know. These shadows being cast by these puppets are the only world that they know. So, there is a prisoner who stands up and turns around and sees the fire and the puppeteers and the puppets and what's happening to the wall. Now, initially, when this person stands and sees the fire, he's blinded by the light. He's confused by it. He doesn't even know what he's seeing. But then, once his eyes adjust and he understands, oh, this light is hitting these objects, and then these objects are casting a shadow on the wall, and what I thought was a rabbit was not a rabbit. It was merely the shadow of a rabbit. See, these people, while they're sitting here with their backs to the wall, they're talking to one another about what they see, and they're describing it, and they're defining it, and they believe what they're seeing is real, but they're just shadows. But this one stands, turns, and this one now has a right opinion about the divided line from the previous slides. This right opinion about the divided line, it still isn't knowledge, because he's still seeing puppets that are casting shadows. So then this liberated prisoner is dragged out of the cave and taken outside and sees, after getting over being completely blinded by the sun, the real three-dimensional truth, the rabbit jumping across the field that the puppet was just a representative of. that the shadow was just a representative of the representative. At this point, this one has knowledge. And they run back in to tell the ones sitting behind the wall what they've seen. How do you think the people at the wall would respond? This person is a lunatic, a raving madman. They might even come to kill this one who possesses true knowledge and is challenging their presuppositions of knowledge by sharing with them the truth. When you read this, you see Plato is upset, very upset with what the democracy in Athens did to his teacher Socrates, because Socrates was one who understood the truth and was trying to open other people's eyes to it, and he was killed because they could not understand. So again, let me walk through it in a different way, a little faster. The Allegory of the Cave is essentially a picture of the mind's ascent to knowledge, to awakening, to understanding. The puppets symbolize ordinary objects of the physical world, which are mere copies of the forms. So in other words, the prisoners only see imitations of imitations, which means they lack even true beliefs about the ordinary objects that are outside of the cave. Imitations of imitations. The prisoner who turns around and sees these objects, these puppets, these imitations, possesses true belief or a right opinion in the divided line. The liberated prisoner who's been dragged out of the cave and sees real physical objects corresponding to the one, this one has true knowledge of the forms. The sun itself, this is significant, the sun itself corresponds to the form of the good or the beautiful. See, the good and the beautiful, Plato would use those terms almost interchangeably, describes this as the form from which all other forms are either understood or even derive their essence. So at times he'll call it ton proton, the one. So that is Plato's metaphysic. This is the Allegory of the Cave, as put in the Republic. And so you can imagine how an educational philosophy would be shaped if you believe this is the way the world, or the two worlds, the world of the ideal, which is coffee, and the world of the physical, which is unreliable and based only in sense perception, how he would teach and what his objectives would be. And we'll see that when we look at how he structured his ideal world. All right, so another way to say it, we have the world of concrete particulars. That's where you and I are living. That's where this coffee, the coldness of the handle, the warmth of the mug, the smell of the coffee, all of these things are sensorily derived. It's not knowledge, it's my awareness of these concrete particulars. And so this is a particular object, an actual thing. But I can only have true belief. I can't actually have knowledge. Images, perception of things. These things are the concrete particulars, the physical world. And so we can have opinions that are derived through sensory experience. Then we have on the other side the abstract universals. These exist in another world without space or time. So you at the lower class of the divided line, you'd have things, like I said, mathematics, geometry, class concepts. But then at the higher level, you have truth, beauty, justice, goodness. So the epistemology of Plato, in light of all this, is grounded on pure reason alone. Hypotheses and images. Belief is based on reliable perception. Conjecture, so opinion, is based on unreliable perception. All right. This is the last way I'll attempt to illustrate it, and hopefully one of these has stuck. Do you remember this chart from the beginning? So as we're considering specifically Plato's philosophy of education, I want to look at three different categories. I'm going to start with his ontology. So Plato maintains that ideas, such as the ideals of perfect beauty and goodness are more real than material things, such as a beautiful sunset or a good person. This is because the ideas are unchanging and timeless, whereas particular material things are always changing and always in a state of flux. Human beings are able to grasp these ideas by means of our intellect. This intellect, the rational being, is the most important part of our immortal soul. So that's the heart of his ontology. Moving from there to epistemology, Plato maintains that knowledge is the apprehension, the receiving of unchanging truths. The objects of knowledge can only be the unchangeable ideas or forms. The opinion, as we said in the last slide, that falls between knowledge and ignorance. So it's not quite to knowledge, and it's not just raw ignorance, but it's opinion, it's belief. Your opinions, your beliefs can be either true or false. So you can have a certain belief, you can have confidence in this belief, but you can be wrong. Whereas knowledge, you'll never be wrong if you actually know it. Right? And then finally, his ethics. How does this play into his ethics? How then should you live? If you believe these things to be true in education and teaching, what fruit will it have in the life of your students? Well, Plato, I'm going to have some more coffee. Plato was an ancient philosopher who researched tubers and roots and came up with the first potato. It wasn't a sweet potato. Never mind. Okay, so Plato, not Plato. Plato maintains that the best life is one that possesses knowledge of the ideas. So this person knows what justice is. They have the ideal of justice in their mind and ideal goodness, the good. They know these things. And because they know these things, they live differently. People will always lead inferior types of lives if they just settle on opinions about what is right or wrong. The city is best led when its guardians have knowledge about justice and goodness. So Plato would strongly maintain that true ethical knowledge is not a matter of mere subjective opinion, that there is something that is indisputably true about justice and goodness. And you'll see when we look at his ideal society and how education should work, that justice is a governing principle for Plato. So in a moment, we will talk about Plato and the Athenian Academy, and we will look at the school, we will look at its grounding principles, we'll look at the way that he envisioned it working, and finally his utopian society that could exist if this is the way that education actually worked. But I'll go ahead and stop now so you all can get your own cups of coffee.